The first time I heard the word violation from my HOA, I laughed it off. I figured it was a harmless notice about trimming my hedges or repainting a fence. My cabin sat on the edge of their jurisdiction, half hidden by towering pines. It had been my sanctuary for years, away from city noise and constant stress. Little did I know that notice was the start of a storm I couldn't imagine. The letter came in a neat white envelope, stamped with the HOA's crest. Inside was a list of so-called required improvements. For my property, I wanted new siding in their approved color palette, 3 shades of beige. Demanded I shorten my fence, remove my garden, and change my porch chairs. Apparently, my taste in furniture was non-compliant with community standards. At first, I thought it was a bad joke or some clerical mistake. I'd bought my cabin outright, no mortgage, and it sat on my own land. Sure, I'd agreed to basic HOA guidelines when I moved in, years back. But nothing in their handbook gave them the right to control my furniture. Still, I called the HOA office to clear it up, thinking it'd be easy. The woman on the phone was polite but icy in her tone. She said my refusal to comply would result in escalating fines each month. I asked what law gave them the authority to demand such changes. She replied, "Sir, you signed the agreement and we can enforce it." That was the first time I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I ignored the fines at first, figuring they'd get bored and move on. Instead, the letters grew more aggressive, now threatening legal action. Neighbors started avoiding me at the mailbox, eyes down, lips tight. Rumor had it the HOA president, Martin Hale, wanted me gone. It wasn't about the porch chairs, it was about control. By the 3rd month, fines totaled more than my monthly expenses. They tacked on penalties for unapproved landscaping and non-standard siding. My bright green shutters became their latest target, too vibrant for the area. I refused to repaint them just to fit their bland color scheme. Martin left a note on my door. "This is your last chance." I began documenting everything: photos, videos, and copies of each notice. Something about Martin's persistence felt almost personal, even hostile. I spoke with a lawyer friend who confirmed my suspicion. Without a court order, their power was limited to fines, not destruction. Still, the lawyer warned me to be ready for surprises. I didn't have to wait long for the first surprise to arrive. One crisp morning, I woke to a low, distant rumble. It was deeper than a truck engine, with a steady mechanical growl. The sound vibrated through the wooden beams of my cabin. My coffee cup trembled slightly on the kitchen counter. Pulling back the curtain, I froze at what I saw in the driveway. A yellow bulldozer was crawling toward my front yard like a tank. 2 men in hard hats stood nearby, one holding a clipboard. Behind them, Martin Hale watched, with his arms crossed. His smug expression made my blood run cold. I stepped outside, my voice sharp and loud over the machine's roar. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted at Martin. He didn't flinch, he just pointed at the cabin like a king. "This structure is in violation and is being removed," he said. The bulldozer's blade lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. I demanded to see a court order or demolition permit. Martin smirked and shook his head, refusing to answer. One of the men in hard hats muttered, "We're just following orders." My pulse hammered in my ears as the bulldozer crept forward. I realized then they were really going to do it. I sprinted back inside, grabbed my phone, and hit record. Through the screen, I captured the bulldozer's metal blade scraping earth. Splinters flew as it tore into my front steps without hesitation. It cracked like gunshots echoing through the morning air. My voice shook as I dialed 911, explaining the scene. The dispatcher's tone shifted when I said no court order. She assured me an officer was en route immediately. Outside, Martin barked orders to clear it all down. The workers ripped into the porch while my heart pounded. It felt like I was watching my life crumble in real time. Neighbors began to gather at the edge of the property. Some filmed the destruction. Others whispered nervously. One woman shook her head and muttered, "This isn't legal," clung to that thought like a lifeline in rough water. Somehow I had to hold them off until the police arrived. Martin caught my gaze and smirked like he'd already won. The bulldozer swung around, now facing the cabin itself. The operator revved the engine, louder, more threatening. Each vibration rattled the picture frames on my walls. I could smell the diesel fumes seeping through the cracks. I stepped forward, blocking the path of the machine. The operator hesitated, looking to Martin for approval. Martin shouted, "Keep going! You can't stop us!" My voice rose to a roar. "This is trespassing." But the engine just kept rumbling under the morning. "Son," that's when I heard it, the distant wail of sirens. It started faint, but grew sharper with each passing second. Martin glanced toward the sound, his jaw tightening slightly. The crowd of neighbors shifted, sensing a shift in the air. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across his face. I planted my feet and refused to move from the bulldozer's path. The operator killed the engine, looking uneasy now. Martin strode toward me, fury blazing in his eyes. "This is your fault," he hissed under his breath. I just smiled because I knew what was coming next. The sirens grew louder until they were right at my driveway. 2 patrol cars pulled up, gravel crunching under their tires. Doors swung open, and uniformed officers stepped out briskly. They scanned the scene, a half-destroyed porch, neighbors watching, dust in the air. One officer's eyes narrowed when he spotted the bulldozer's position. Martin walked toward them with his arms wide like he owned the place. "Officers, thank you for coming. This man is obstructing lawful HOA work," he spoke loudly, ensuring every neighbor heard his version of events. The lead officer, a tall woman with mirrored sunglasses, didn't smile back. Instead, she asked, "Do you have a demolition permit for this?" Martin hesitated for just a fraction of a second before speaking. "We don't need 1-hour bylaws. Give us full authority," he said. The officer removed her sunglasses, locking eyes with him sharply. "Sir, bylaws don't override state property laws," she replied evenly. Her partner stepped closer to inspect the damage to my cabin. The younger officer pointed at the splintered wood and scattered debris. This looked like destruction of private property to me, he muttered. Martin's face flushed red as he straightened his posture. "Listen, we have every right. He's been in violation for months." But the officer's expression didn't change from cool skepticism. I stepped forward, phone still recording in my trembling hand. "I told them there was no court order, and they ignored me," I said. The lead officer turned toward me and nodded slowly. "Do you have documentation of this exchange?" she asked. I held up my phone and showed her the live recording. The officers exchanged a quick glance before moving toward the workers. "Gentlemen, please shut down the machinery and step away," the lead said. The bulldozer operator lifted his hands slightly and climbed down. The clipboard man looked from Martin to the officers nervously. One officer escorted them both toward the patrol car's side. Martin tried to intervene, stepping between the workers and the police. "You can't take them, they're just doing their jobs," he barked. The lead officer's voice hardened instantly, cutting through the air. "Sir, right now you're interfering with an active investigation." Her hand hovered near her holstered weapon in silent warning. The crowd murmured at the sudden shift in tone and power. Phones were now raised everywhere, capturing the unfolding scene. I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Daniels, whisper something to her husband. This was no longer just an HOA dispute, it was a public spectacle. The air crackled with tension, and Martin's bravado began to crumble. "Mr. Hale," the officer began, "you're the HOA president, correct?" Martin nodded cautiously, clearly unsure where this was heading. "And you authorized this demolition without legal clearance?" I followed our bylaws," he said, his voice losing its edge. The younger officer stepped in. "With a citation book already open, you're being detained for trespassing and destruction of property," he said. The lead officer added, "and possibly conspiracy, pending further investigation." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by low murmurs of disbelief. Martin's jaw dropped before he could form any words. The metallic click of handcuffs punctuated the moment like a drumbeat. As they secured Martin's wrists, his eyes darted toward me. There was no smugness now, only raw, simmering anger. "You'll regret this," he hissed through clenched teeth. But I knew his threats had just lost their teeth entirely. The officers led him toward the waiting patrol car. The bulldozer operator sat quietly in the back of the first car. The clipboard man was placed in the second patrol vehicle. Martin was loaded into the same back seat as the operator. slammed shut with a finality that felt poetic. Neighbors whispered, "Unbelievable," and finally, "Justice." One officer stayed behind to take my full statement. She photographed the damage from every angle, methodical and calm. One provided copies of every notice, fine, and threat I'd received. She studied them carefully, shaking her head at certain passages. "This will be more than enough for the DA to review," she said. The lead officer returned after speaking into her radio. "Mr. Hale and the others will be booked for property crimes," she confirmed. "You should also consider pursuing civil damages for the destruction." Her words landed like a lifeline. I knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning of holding them accountable. As the patrol cars rolled away, the crowd began to disperse. A few neighbors approached, me quietly offering their support. "I always thought he was overstepping," one man muttered. Another woman added, "We were afraid to speak up." It seemed Martin's control had been built on intimidation alone. The adrenaline drained from my body, leaving me shaky. My porch was half gone, my steps splintered into rubble. Dust still hung in the air, catching the late morning light. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. The HOA's unchecked reign had been publicly challenged. I walked back inside. Setting my phone carefully on the counter, the video I'd captured could now serve as powerful evidence. Emails began buzzing in from local reporters who'd heard the story. Somehow word was spreading faster than I could process. The battle had shifted from my yard to the public eye. Outside, the sound of birds returned to the air. Without the roar of the bulldozer, the forest felt alive again. But my mind was already racing ahead to the legal fight. I knew Martin wouldn't go down without trying to strike back. And I had no intention of letting him recover his power. That night, I barely slept, replaying the day's events. Every detail burned into my memory like a brand. The smell of diesel, the crack of wood, the officer's voice. Some moments felt surreal, like watching a movie of my life. But the bruised reality sat right outside my window. Before dawn, I sat at my desk, writing everything down. If I was going to win this, I needed a full record. Every notice, every conversation, every thread, it all mattered. I organized files, printed photos, and backed up the videos twice. Preparation became my armor against whatever came next. By sunrise, the cabin felt strangely quiet without the threat looming. I made coffee, staring out at the damaged porch steps. The scars in the earth where the bulldozer sat were still fresh. They felt like open wounds, waiting to be stitched by justice. And I planned to stitch them tighter than they imagined by the next week. My story was everywhere. Local TV, blogs, and social media. Clips of Martin being handcuffed spread like wildfire across Facebook groups. Reporters showed up at my driveway. Eager to get the HOA horror scoop, they asked the same questions. Why did they target you? And what's next? Answer was always the same. They crossed a line, and it's not over. The first step was hiring a seasoned property rights attorney. Her name was Claire Monroe, sharp-eyed and calm under pressure. She'd handled cases where HOAs overstepped, and she knew every loophole. After reviewing my evidence, she said, "This is a slam dunk." Her confidence was the first thing that truly put me at ease. Claire filed a civil lawsuit for damages, trespassing, and emotional distress. She also sought punitive damages to make an example out of Martin. Within days, the HOA's insurance lawyers reached out for talks. But Claire refused to settle early, knowing the public was watching. "This isn't just about money. It's about precedent," she reminded me. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to control the narrative. They issued a statement calling the incident a misunderstanding. But the footage told a different story, blades tearing into my porch. Every broadcast replayed the moment Martin gave the bulldozer order. His smug expression became the face of HOA arrogance nationwide. Neighbors began coming forward with their own horror stories. One man said they fined him for leaving his garage door open. Another woman claimed Martin tried to evict her over garden gnomes. It became clear this wasn't just my fight. It was a community fight. Claire called it a pattern of abusive authority. When the criminal hearing for Martin began, the courthouse was packed. Supporters filled the benches, holding quiet. But visible signs Martin walked in wearing a suit but looked gaunt and tired. The charges included trespassing, destruction of property, and conspiracy. His lawyer tried to frame it as community enforcement gone wrong. The prosecution played my video in full for the jury. Every sound, the blade scraping, my protests. The crowd gasping filled the room. Jurors leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. When the clip ended, the silence was almost heavier than the noise. Martin avoided looking at me as the lights came back on. After 3 days, the verdict came, guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to probation, fines, and community service. The bulldozer crew received lighter penalties for following orders, but the criminal conviction made the civil trial even stronger, Claire said. Now we go for the knockout punch. During the civil trial, the HOA's attorney tried a new tactic. They claimed I provoked the demolition by refusing compliance. Claire tore that argument apart in less than an hour. She cited state statutes, property law, and HOA limitations line by line. The judge often nodded along, clearly unimpressed. With their defense, when the jury returned, my hands were clenched in my lap. They awarded me full compensation for the damage plus punitive damages. The total was more than enough to rebuild my cabin completely. It also forced the HOA to overhaul their enforcement procedures. Martin's resignation was announced the very next day. The settlement check arrived in a plain white envelope. Holding it felt like holding proof that standing up was worth it. But it wasn't the money that mattered most, it was the precedent. Other HOA members across the state began citing my case. The ripple effect was bigger than I'd ever imagined. In the weeks after, I rebuilt the porch with reinforced cedar. Each nail I hammered felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. Neighbors volunteered to help, bringing tools and fresh lumber. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted with coffee when it was done. The cabin looked stronger than it ever had before. Claire visited one afternoon to see the finished work. She stood on the new steps, hands on her hips. "You know, you've become a bit of a symbol," she said. I laughed, unsure how to respond to that kind of weight. But I knew she was right. People saw hope in my win. One evening, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. Inside was a single sentence. "Thank you for standing up to him." No name, no return address, just neat handwriting online. Paper. I tucked it into a drawer with my other case documents. It reminded me that even silent supporters have a voice. Months later, the HOA quietly replaced their bylaws. The new rules required court approval before any property action. They added a clause protecting owners from arbitrary enforcement. Martin's legacy had been erased, replaced by safeguards. The irony wasn't lost on MIT took their downfall to fix them. Looking back, I realized how close I came to losing everything. If I hadn't recorded that morning, it might have been my word against theirs. The video became my shield, and the law became my sword. It taught me that intimidation only works when you're silent. And I had decided early on that I wouldn't be. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, I breathe easier. The wind through the pines no longer carries the weight of conflict. Neighbors wave when they pass, some stopping to chat a while. The fear that once hung over the street has lifted. My cabin still stands, stubborn as the day I built it. A year after the incident, my life had returned to a calm rhythm. The cabin stood proud, every beam and board a quiet statement of defiance. The porch had weathered through all 4 seasons without a single issue. Each morning I drank coffee while watching the mist roll through the pines. Peace had finally settled back over my small corner of the world, but the case never truly faded from public memory. Property rights forums still referenced the bulldozer. Case as a warning. Videos of Martin's arrest kept resurfacing whenever HOA abuse was discussed. I would occasionally get tagged in online debates about community overreach. My story had become part of a larger conversation about limits in law. I began receiving emails from people in other states. Some were fighting their own HOAs over ridiculous demands. Others had already lost property and were looking for a way back, and he thanked me for showing it could be done. I realized my battle had helped people I'd never met. A small nonprofit reached out, asking me to speak at a seminar. They focused on educating homeowners about their rights under state law. I hesitated at first. I wasn't a public speaker by nature, but Claire encouraged me, saying, "You have a story worth telling." So I stood before a crowded hall and shared my experience. The reaction was overwhelming. People nodded, clapped, and took notes. Afterward, a man approached with tears in his eyes. He said his HOA had threatened to remove his late wife's garden. My words, he told me, gave him the courage to fight back. It struck me that sometimes resistance spreads like wildfire. As for Martin, his fall from power was absolute. He moved out of the neighborhood quietly within 6 months. Word was he'd tried to join another HOA board in a nearby town. But his reputation followed him, and the members voted him out. It seemed poetic that he couldn't escape the rules he once abused. Occasionally, I still see his name in small legal bulletins. Petty disputes, unpaid fines, minor code violations, it's always something. It's as if he can't function without conflict to fuel him. But he no longer has the machinery of an HOA at his back. For that alone, I sleep easier at night, Claire. And I stayed in touch long after the case ended. She became a friend, not just an attorney. Sometimes we meet for coffee and laugh about legal loopholes. Other times, we talk about new cases she's taking on. I know if trouble ever comes again, she's one call away. The HOA, under new leadership, is almost unrecognizable now. They focus on maintenance, landscaping, and community events, not control. New board members actively seek homeowner input. Before making changes, several have even apologized privately for staying silent under Martin's rule. It's a reminder that people can change when the culture changes. The scars on the lawn from the bulldozer have long since healed. Grass grows thick and green where the tracks once cut deep. But I kept one splintered beam from the old porch as a memento. It leans in the corner of my workshop, weathered but intact. A reminder that some battles are worth every second of the fight. Now, when I walk the property line, I feel a quiet pride. Not just for standing up to Martin, but for standing up at all. The cabin is more than wood and nails. It's a testament. A place where fear was replaced by resolve, and where the sound of a bulldozer turned into the sound of victory. 2 years after the bulldozer incident, I rarely thought about the HOA. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm of work, coffee, and quiet. But every so often, a new headline would drag me back. Another homeowner somewhere else had fatanned. Beaten an abusive board. Almost every time. My name showed up in the articles. Claire joked that I had become the accidental poster child for HOA reform. She wasn't wrong. People still emailed me for advice or encouragement. Some wanted to know which laws had protected me. Others just needed someone to remind them they weren't crazy. I answered as many messages as I could, even years later. The cabin itself became a symbol in its own way. Visitors would sometimes stop to take photos from the road. I'd see them whispering, pointing to where the porch had been rebuilt. Once, a family brought cookies and thanked me for my stand. They said their own HOA had backed down after seeing my case. Local politicians even started referencing the cabin case in debates. One bill was introduced to strengthen protections for homeowners statewide. It required court orders before any property alteration or removal. With overwhelming support from both parties, change, it seemed, could grow from the smallest patch of land. Martin, on the other hand, faded into relative obscurity. I heard rumors he'd taken a low-level job in another county. No one seemed to know much, and fewer seemed to care. His name no longer inspired fear, only a kind of weary pity, the power gone. His voice no longer carried past his own walls. I invested part of the settlement into reinforcing my property rights. Surveyors marked every inch of my boundaries with permanent posts. A security system kept an unblinking watch on every angle. Not out of fear, but out of principle, this was mine. And no one would touch it without facing the law. Sometimes when storms rolled in, I'd sit on the porch and listen. The wind rattled the trees, the rain drummed on the roof. I'd think back to the roar of that bulldozer in the morning fog, how close I came to losing it all in a single day. Those moments still sent a shiver down my spine, yet I wouldn't erase the experience even if I could. It taught me that silence enables abuse of power. It showed me the strength in standing my ground, no matter the odds. And it proved that even the smallest voice can echo far. That lesson, more than anything, was worth keeping. Now, every nail, every plank of wood, every blade of grass matters. The cabin is more than shelter. It's a victory monument. A reminder that the law can still serve the people. A warning to anyone who might try to overreach again. And a promise to myself that I'll never back down. I'm writing this with the sun dipping low beyond the pines. The porch boards beneath me are warm from the day's heat. In the distance, the forest hums with its usual evening chorus. It's the same sound I almost lost when the bulldozer came. But now it feels deeper, like the land is breathing with me. Looking back, I see a chain of moments that could have broken me. The first violation notice, the mounting fines, the sleepless nights, the roar of diesel, Martin's voice, the splintering wood. Each one felt like a step toward losing something irreplaceable. But together, they became the reason I fought harder. If there's one truth this battle taught me, it's this. Rights mean nothing if you're too afraid to defend them. HOA, bylaws, contracts, and threats can feel absolute, but they crumble when held up to the light of real law. Fear is their strongest tool. Take it away. They have nothing. I've learned that standing alone doesn't always mean being alone. Support can come from neighbors, strangers, even quiet onlookers. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone else to take the first step. And when you do, you give them permission to step forward too. It's how one voice becomes many and change takes root. The cabin is stronger now than it's ever been, not because of the cedar beams or reinforced porch, but because it stands as proof that resistance works. It's a message in wood and stone. You can push back, and sometimes you can win. I don't know who will read this years from now. Maybe you're facing your own HOA nightmare. Maybe it's a different kind of bully altogether. Whatever it is, know this your ground is worth defending, even if it's just a porch in the woods. So I'll keep sitting here in the fading light. Listening to the wind through the trees, I refuse to surrender. Watching the land I fought to keep exactly as it is, knowing that somewhere someone else is finding their voice and smiling, because I know exactly how that feels.